And welcome back to the Hotline. We are talking Ferrari struggles in Australia and why there is hope for the Chinese Grand Prix, especially if you are a Ferrari fan and or Leclerc or Lewis Hamilton fan. Still, fingers crossed, there is hope. So while I completely understand it's tough being a Ferrari fan, all that promise, and of course they're going to get it right next year, but here from planetf1.com, Ferrari shipwrecked a serious problem discovered in their simulator. And it does bear some resemblance as to why they were not particularly great at the Australian Grand Prix. They were considered shipwrecked as a serious problem with the SF24 car was discovered. It was after practice, and that's at least the claim. Now, the Scuderia, as we know, they enjoyed, let's be fair, a less than stellar Australian Grand Prix weekend in spite or despite all the hype of Lewis Hamilton coming out, Charles Leclerc there, testing, believing being potentially the third, fourth, maybe fastest car. But Hamilton finishing 10th and Leclerc not that much higher up in 8th. So, Ferrari reportedly shipwrecked after what was a serious problem considered at the Australian Grand Prix. And it came after a disappointing performance in qualifying. That saw the Ferrari pair down on row number 4 for numbers, that's 7th and 8th. They were slower than both the Williams of Alex Albon and Yuki Tsunoda's racing, but which would make you scratch your head, to be fair. So Ferrari made an encouraging start though. When you look at the initial practice sessions, especially if you're Charles Leclerc, his fastest FP2 time put him clear of both the, in the end, potentially dominant McLarens had it not been for the rain. And it was Lando, but it was Lando Norris that ultimately secured the front row lockout along with Oscar Piastri for the McLaren. So Norris's victory, as we know, he's put him in the lead of the driver's title for the first time in his career. And he goes to the Chinese Grand Prix as the championship leader, with Red Bull's Max Verstappen finishing third. Now, finishing second, a report by the Italian media of motorsport.com that shed new light on how Ferrari's weekend took, let's be fair, they say a wrong turn, a very wrong turn, not quite a U-turn. Should we go right angles? But it's claimed that the setup the team identified in the simulator, this is ahead of Melbourne, had proven incorrect. And I think this is really important. It says here, Ferrari proceeded to raise the ride height for the remainder of the weekend because to avoid excessive wear to the skid blocks. Now, the minute you lift the ride height up, the ground effect's not particularly good, the downforce under the car is not particularly good, you don't have much grip, the car can have stability issues, and leaving the skid blocks down, as we all know, America, the United States Grand Prix 2023, you could be disqualified. So it's been described as a serious problem, as the SF25 features a number of concept changes for the final year of the current regulations. It was designed with an aggressive aerodynamic snap. So as we know, this current ground effect era, teams have faced the challenge of running the car's ride height as low as possible, which we've explained. This obviously gets the maximum downforce. Normally, downforce means fast around the corners. Leclerc and Hamilton, then the Mercedes, were disqualified in the United States Grand Prix. We've already spoken about that. And the report adds that the team's choice of a medium downforce rear wing, described as a parachute for Australia, only worsened the car's performance, with other leading teams all electing for what was a smaller rear wing. I think that's fairly interesting. So when we look on Facebook, Ferrari could say ground height will not be a problem for the SF25. This is on one of the F1 sites, and I thought this is quite an interesting point. It said there is uncertainty over Ferrari's true performance level after the Australian Grand Prix. Leo Turini discussed the situation on a Formula 1 analysis podcast called Spit Stop, questioning whether Ferrari struggles were just early season sign or more deep concerns. Now, setup problems have significantly hindered the SF25 in Melbourne. Turini suggested that if the car's poor showing was due to fundamental design flaws rather than temporary issues, it would be a major disappointment for Ferrari fans and Lewis fans and Leclerc fans. Now, the sprint race in China will provide limited track time for adjustments. As we said, going into our preview, it's going to put more pressure on Ferrari, especially with these stories of these logistics coming into China, where all the team's cars are going to be late, adds to that. But the Maranello team may have to wait to Suzuka to completely understand the issues where you've got three essentially practice sessions. Loic Serra previously emphasised the high correlation between Ferrari's track and simulation data being good. Despite the SF25's poor showing in Melbourne, that's positive. What you don't want is a bad correlation, which has happened to teams and it's hampered them potentially for the rest of the season. And he stated that the team had confidence in their development direction. Ferrari have been investigating the balance since this race in Melbourne ended. One theory suggests the team raised the car's ride height to prevent excessive plank wear, which is the story we've just spoken on, although no official confirmation has been given. Fred Vassar and Loic Serra, they are leading Ferrari's analysis of the car's aerodynamic form. The team is evaluating whether the issue stems from a new pull rod suspension, and they don't have as much experience in this pull rod suspension as other teams, which I think is fair enough. I mean, so the reason they struggle in China, aerodynamic configuration. They arrived in Australia with the same setup used in Bahrain test. They focused on wet conditions. However, the high downforce rear wing did make it slower down the straight. On their qualifying performance, both struggled with tyre overheating. They weren't the only team to do so, particularly in the last sector. They were within a tenth of Lando Norris in the fastest cars quite often, until, let's say, the last 3 or 4 corners, and they lost massive amounts of time. In their race strategy, they kept Hamilton and Leclerc on slick tyres for 1 or maybe even 2 laps too long, and that leaded them coming out in 8th and 9th. And don't forget, Hamilton's less than stellar communication issues with his race engineer. So there are many reasons where Ferrari went wrong, but that's a lot of it is low-hanging fruit. So as a Ferrari fan, do not despair. I'm sure they'll be back with a vengeance. They may not be the fastest car or the second fastest car, but they're going to be there. Would it surprise me if they get a podium? Absolutely not at the Chinese Grand Prix, but fingers crossed, we shall no doubt see. But until then, if you want to subscribe, that'll be amazing. But just by clicking on this video is more than enough for us. If you want to do a bit more though, hit the like button, comment below, let us know what you think Ferrari will do at the Chinese Grand Prix this weekend. But until then, speak to you soon. Thank you very much for watching, but above all else, stay safe.